But Harold's exactly right when I think about Romeo and Juliet and how it has shaped our understanding of love and courtship in the West. I mean, what other single work plays such a prominent role in doing that? I know of no other. And so I don't want to make too many assumptions about what we had hoped this time to be about. It's always presumptuous when someone gets up to speak, so I don't want to presume too much. I do want to leave some time for give and take, and to let you know that at any time, question, comment, interjection, yes, any of those and others that I hadn't thought of at any time are completely appropriate for our discussion today. So this is a fireside chat without the fire. And I'd ordered that too. I don't know. We're working on the you'll remember that. That's right. He said once. So I thought it would be appropriate to perhaps touch on some of those lesser known elements of Shakespeare's life. Perhaps we'll talk about that just a bit, then move into the play itself. And of course, we have to read from the play. Gosh, it's one of the things I promised every one of my students when I teach, and I teach a lot, just not as much as I'd like. And so if you're an instructor at this institution or another one, and you're going to be skiing sometime soon and going to miss a day, I'm the person to call before you cancel class because I'm starved for teaching more. So I'd love to do that. But I promise students that when I teach, we will hear the word, hear the spoken word. Drama especially was not meant to be read, truly not meant to be read without being read aloud. And so it's the skeleton, isn't it? And I have very little flesh to put on those bones today, but I'd like to put a little on before we leave. So what do we know about Shakespeare? How many know when he was born? Give me the date of his birth, please. Yes, please. April 23rd. I'm sorry. There's some sort of proviso now. I heard April 23rd, and it's followed by supposedly. We deal with facts here. This is an academic institution. Are we saying that April 23rd is a disputed date of his birth?
He was baptized on April 26th.
He was baptized on April 26th. That is correct. What is the year of his baptism?
Ooh, I don't know.
1564 is correct, and there's no prize. But there's that personal satisfaction that supersedes any prize that one could give. So we know that he was baptized on the 26th, so why the 23rd? Why do we choose the 23rd for the date? And that is the date that is most often given, followed by a question mark indicating we are not certain. Why the 23rd?
Because babies were usually baptized 3 days after they were born.
Babies were very often baptized 3 days after they were born, so good, excellent point. Well, why else the 23rd of April? Why else? There's a symmetry about it because we know when he died. He died on April 23rd, so there's a lovely symmetry there. What else about April 23rd and James's England and Elizabeth's England? It is St. George's Day, excellent. So talk about symmetry, how wonderful to think that St. George, the very patron saint of England, right, there's his day. Well, if Shakespeare's to have a day, should it not be that day? There are some things that mitigate against April 23rd being the date of his birth. Most scholars agree that Shakespeare's greatest accomplishment, his greatest accomplishment was not all of the works that we know best. His greatest accomplishment was what? Experts agree on this. We're all scholars. Emma, please. I mean, as the founder of Regent's English Club, we would assume, poor Emma, she's thinking, I should have never introduced myself to this man. Should never have sat in this seat. But his greatest accomplishment, we agree, is the fact that he survived the first year of his life. The fact that Shakespeare survived the first year of his life, because this much we know, the plague was in Stratford. The plague was in Stratford when he was born, and so if the plague is in Stratford and you have a child, you do not wait 3 days to baptize that child. You do not wait 3 days. It is certain to take that child. More than 2/3 of the children in England in the year of Shakespeare's birth died from the plague. 2/3. A stunning figure that would lead us to guess that it was likely that he was born probably on the 25th or the 24th. But I agree. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. What is your name?
Scott.
I agree with Scott that it's a lovely symmetry, and we will continue to use the 23rd as the day of his birth and the day of his death. I mentioned where he was born. Let's say it again. Where was he born? Stratford. It's often expanded to Stratford on Avon or upon Avon. And what's Avon? It's a river. Have you seen this river, Ralph? No. Raise your hand if you've seen the river. I've seen the river. I'm preaching now. I've seen the river. I've seen the river. How would you compare Avon to other rivers you've seen, Emma?
Not favorable.
Not favorably? Well, what is it about the Avon that leads you to say that?
It's not pretty at all.
It's not pretty at all. It's pretty ugly. It's more like a stream, a trickle most of the time. It is navigable. Punting is a favorite exercise of those in Stratford, and it's not the punting, the football punting that many of us know. Punting is a word that describes what? Boating using a long stick. That's right. So one can punt in Stratford. Stratford, like pretty much every city, was founded on or near water, remembering that while in our day we don't think about it, water was the most navigable way that folks got around. It was true of Shakespeare when he was in Stratford upon Avon. It was true of Shakespeare when he went to London. Right? The London waterways were used much more than their streets were, and so it's clear that it was a place of navigation. And in truth, it was a place where folks gathered seasonally. They gathered there, and it's also clear that while he may have had little Latin and less Greek, Shakespeare was from Stratford, a place that would have enjoyed visits from troops from London, and we're rather certain that Shakespeare in his youth had the wonderful luxury of seeing some of these wonderful players come to Stratford. Are there Oxfordians in the crowd? Generally, they bring signs to things like this. Heckle me before I can begin. There's one. There's a clear Oxfordians. Who are these rabble-rousers? When I talk about Oxfordians, who are these folks, these questioners who demean will? Mr. Shakespeare, who are the Oxfordians and what do they believe?
They believe the Earl of Oxford.
That the Earl of Oxford, the 17th Earl of Oxford, this Edward de Vere,
That he is the true author.
he is the true author of those 39 or so plays that we generally attribute to William Shakespeare. One, William Shakespeare from Stratford upon Avon. We don't have time for that debate today. We don't. But please stay after. I'll cancel all other appointments on my, if you really want to fight this out. But here's one of the clearest, really two pretty clear ones. Edward was brilliant and a solid writer, not Shakespeare. He was not a Shakespeare. He died in 1604. 1604. So when was the gunpowder plot? Let's see. 1604 seems a little bit later than that. Gunpowder plot surely finds its way into Macbeth. No question about that. And then what do we do with a play like The Tempest, which we are sure was written by Shakespeare, not Edward, again, dead long before there's any sort of shipwreck that would lead to a play. One of the few plays that sprung from Shakespeare's imagination was The Tempest. So sorry if you're an Oxfordian, and I know there are Baconians and others that are out there that are sure it couldn't have been William Shakespeare. And most scholars agree this springs from one bias, and the bias is against a man of little learning. Little learning. And yet we should not degrade the learning that he had. Remember, the very first mention of any one Shakespeare related to William Shakespeare was the fact that his father was cited, written a ticket for having too much dung in the street. I know it. I know, isn't it a horrible way? Horrible way to begin one's literary career, to be cited in such a fashion. But Shakespeare, before he died, was a gentleman. Certainly rose in the ranks, and with him his father rose, and I'm sure his father was quite proud to know that the Shakespeare name actually bore a coat of arms. Is it possible this dung-cited man, his father, who was very clearly a tanner? He was a tanner and a leather worker, and so that meant he was a butcher. Is it possible that, and he wasn't legally a butcher, let's be honest, a tanner should not have been selling meat from his home, but he was an entrepreneur, he certainly was that. And among his many jobs was ale tasting. Talk about jobs you'd like to line up for. A hearty yay from Mark up front. Can you see that now? Wanted ale taster. Can you imagine the government? Well, of course you can imagine that. Yes, well, we won't talk. Yes. But this one won't do. Let's bring on another. Yes. We often think about England and tea, but let's be clear. In Shakespeare's day, beer was the beverage of the day. And yes, in the morning. Yes, in the afternoon. And yes, in the evening, tea was much, much later, much later. But in Shakespeare's day, it was beer and crumpets. And so I know, a match made not exactly in heaven, but his father, yes, an ale taster. But his father rose in the ranks as well, rose enough in the ranks to put his son in grammar school, and a fine grammar school. No question that the master teacher in that school came from one of two schools. There were really only two universities in England at this time. What were they? Oxford and Cambridge. Hey, not too shabby. So one of those two schools. I'm sorry, gals. No gals yet, unfortunately. We would have had better teachers. I'm kidding. Not really. But it's clear that one of those two schools, probably Cambridge, but it could have been Oxford, was teaching Shakespeare. And what language was taught in his grammar school? Latin. Matter of fact, it was not only taught, it was the only language spoken. So when Will began in the morning, and it would have been early in the morning, and spent all day, he may have had little Latin, but that's the only language that was spoken at his school. He spoke only Latin. So his Latin probably was better than one thought. And of course, genius is one of those things that can't be contained. It's like the fairy dust from Tinkerbell, right? It just explodes. You can't explain it. And it has troubled folks so much that we invent things like Oxfordians and the Baconians and the others that say it can't have been him. It can't have been. His beginnings were too humble. But it's quite clear, the record is incredibly clear, that a man named William Shakespeare, baptized on April 26th of 1564, who died in 1616 on that same date, on the 23rd, in 1616, made his way to the London theater scene. Unquestionably, was a co-owner in a company of men, no question. Lived above a wig maker. Let's get it out of the way. That's right, he was bald. We're almost sure about how Shakespeare looked. He didn't look like any of these modern portrayals in Shakespeare in Love, these handsome men full of yes, these hirsute men. No, he was probably overweight, sign of gentry. He was probably overweight. He certainly was bald, lived above a wig maker, and I'm sure it's just an irony. He didn't do that purposely, but who knows? Cut down on his expenses, perhaps. But without much question any longer, it is clear that that man who was one of the wealthiest men in all of Stratford when he died, but still not a wealthy man. His estate was fairly considerable, but didn't compete with so many of the truly wealthy. What else do we know about his life? We know that he married a woman 8 years his senior, and we know based on when their son was baptized that she was pregnant when they married. She was pregnant when they married. What does that say for certain? Do we know for certain a lot of the details preceding that? Well, we know that their marriage, that which was publicly documented, was after the time that she conceived. But it is possible that they had something that would have been recognized for them to consummate the marriage sometime previous. It's possible, but not likely. It is most likely that she was with child when they married. She was 8 years his senior, and much has been written about their relationship and the love that they had or did not have. Most often, one of the things that's... Yes, please, Judy. Shakespeare, when he married, was in his early 20s. And so Anne Hathaway, and yes, we've heard those lines, Anne Hathaway with men, yes, we've heard those lines, had a way with William. And it's quite clear from their relationship that she did not go with him to London. Not atypical, though. When a man went out for work, very often his family would not accompany him. So that in and of itself shouldn't be too disturbing. But what is often pointed to, I was going to say, is his will, right? It's one of the documents that we have. It's actually locked somewhere in a box in England now, in Kew. And if we were to ferret that thing out, it's as stale and un-Shakespeare-like as anything he ever wrote, his will. It's terse. It indicates perhaps that he was ill. Probably you've heard we only have 6 signatures from Shakespeare that have been identified as his, authenticated at some level. And that 6th one, that last one, indicates that his hand was shaky. Something was wrong, and perhaps very wrong, perhaps very wrong. He amended the will at that time. His daughter, he had 3 children, twins. Hamnet was his only son, Hamnet, who died young. But one of his daughters was about to marry a man named Mr. Quiney. He had not a great reputation. He was a vintner. And in truth, it wasn't, a month after they married that he was fined for public fornication. Fornication outside of marriage, I should say. He was publicly fined for fornication outside of marriage with another woman who died in childbirth with his child. Both she and the child died. So Shakespeare had some inkling that things were troubling on that front. And in truth, he did amend his will and basically cut that daughter out of the will as much as he could, for the most part. And again, the only mention of his wife there is that he bequeaths to her their second best bed. It's the only, it's the only thing that he bequeathed to her, and yet many see this as a love token, because one's first best bed, English major, first best bed, one's best bed would most often be given to whom? An honored guest. So in your home, it's very typical that guests would sleep in your best bed, so your second best bed would literally have been the conjugal bed. And so perhaps by bequeathing her that bed, it was a love token to his wife, whom he loved throughout his career. Most experts that have too much time on their hands, that have analyzed wills from that period, indicate that's not true, that most men left their best bed to their wives, and they're almost certain that, and it's literally an inclusion on the will. He added it later. It's the only thing he left her, and they're almost certain it's more of a slap in her face and an indication that there probably was not a great deal of romance in their relationship. There are very few references in his plays to relationships that indicate his distaste for the fact that their ages were not more consonant. One is fairly well known, though. It is clear in Twelfth Night there's a specific reference where a duke is giving advice to a young man. He thinks he's a young man anyway. He's giving him advice, and he says to marry younger than yourself so that you grow old together in a more natural fashion. It's the only reference in his plays. Much more to be said of his life and of his death, no question about it. I've truncated those things very much, but I did want to get to the play and see if we could not identify some, for me, important elements of Romeo and Juliet, and hopefully things that you haven't seen before. Yes, please.
One question on his life.
Yes.
In sum of all your vast knowledge in his writings,
Yes.
was he likely a homosexual?
Hmm.
We obviously had married and had children, and I've not examined all the evidence, but I think I saw a few sonnets that sounded kind of kinky.
Right. Well, what's interesting is how our concept of relationships between men has changed since Shakespeare's day. So it's quite clear that Shakespeare had a man who funded his work. There's no question that there were several men, but very typical, that a gentleman of the day would give to the arts. And there much has been made of sexuality in Shakespeare's day, and of course written about Shakespeare's own sexuality. We have no written documents from William Shakespeare to indicate his sexuality was anything but heterosexual, but that has not kept many folks from writing contrary thoughts, and especially because there's no question that King James had multiple partners, and it seems quite clear from many of James's writings that his sexual tendencies pretty much went every way. Is it clear that James knew Shakespeare? Yes. That much is clear. But beyond that, there's very little to substantively indicate that he was anything but heterosexual. Other questions about his life that I might be able to muddy for you. Anyway. Great, so let's turn to the play. And I like to begin at the beginning, and this play begins with what word? To, yes. Begins with the word to. To me, it's the most fitting way to begin a play that will be rife with dualities. And of course, instructors love these sorts of things where we categorize. And some of these things can't be categorized. But to, that lovely word that begins the play, seems to lay out for us some of these wondrous dualities. There's a duality in this play that may not be often seen. I mean, it's easy to put some of these things in categories. What are some of the ready-made categories from Romeo and Juliet?
Love and hate.
There we go. Now we're on it. And listen to the excitement in your voice when you say that. Love and hate. Boy, have I heard this lecture before. Love and hate. Yes, what are those families? How are they named? Yeah. And you can see these don't really fit well. And oh my. Dr. Campo, you're not going to do all of these, are you? Well, of course we can't do them all. But, certainly here's one, here's one I'll have to include. Here are a couple that, to me, are transcendent of the play. Many have written that there's only one theme in all of literature, and it's reality and illusion. What is real and what is not? It's the only theme in all of literature. It's the only theme that one could apply to any work of literature, some say. Now, reason and passion, when you think about the Renaissance and then what followed the Renaissance, how can we not include that? Shakespeare's audience very clear on where they would align themselves in terms of reason and passion. And to me, these are critical elements, right? Reason most often associated with the clear light that God bestows upon man. It's the power of the mind. And passion, that dark underbelly that's true to all humans, that cannot be contained, all of these sorts of images. But so many, many others. I could turn to a myriad of passages in the play that illustrate this duality, but let's turn to one of Romeo's early speeches. You'll remember, here's Romeo pining away for Rosalind, this wonderful virgin who will not ope her lap to gold, he says, "Oh, Romeo." But instead, he gives us this speech in Act 1, scene, somebody help me with my glasses, Act 1, scene 1, so early on, about line 150. He notices that there's been a battle. Mercutio's probably wounded, and that's what he says. What fray is here, about line 160. Yet tell me not, for I have heard it all. Here's much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create, O heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms. Feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep. That is not what it is. This love, feel I, that feel no love in this. What an incredible speech that identifies this duality deep in his heart. Chaos and form. Wow, chaos. Chaos and form. How wonderful is this? Chaos. Now, if reason and passion formulate our more seamless duality, where would I put chaos? On which side? Reason or passion side? Passion, of course, right? So here's chaos, and here is form. And to me, there is one of those things. In what month does this play take place? What's the month? It's in July. How do you know that?
Well, the nurse asked the mother, when will be Lamazine? She says fortnight and odd days.
Lamastide Eve at night shall she be 14. Talking about Juliet's age. So we know it's July. We know from her own name, Juliet. Literally, the root of that name comes from July, when the sun is at its zenith. Right? Juliet is the sun, says Romeo. He knows Petrarch. He knows it all pretty well. So it's clear. This is the form that Aeschylus wants in his universe. Who's Aeschylus?
Early Greek writer.
Yes, exactly. But in context of this play, who is Aeschylus? He's the prince. He is the prince, and he wants order. I will call for it. You will do what I say. Susanna knows he well enough to know he must be joking. And he is, of course. But that's the prince. He's trying to emote as best he can, his most forceful voice and his language, on pain of death. That's it. I'll threaten you with death. Thrice have thou disturbed our streets, he says. You've disturbed our streets 3 times. Well, prince, when do you get hold of this chaos? And of course, the truth is you can't, prince. Out of control. Verona is out of control. There's no question, because this isn't England, folks. We're in Italy. We're in Italy. Yes, the Italy that Machiavelli wrote of. Yes, the prince is known well. There's no question that that text is known well. The prince, Italy is also the seat of the papacy. If we had time, we could simply discuss that relationship. When I say that relationship, the relationship between Catholicism and Protestantism, the Reformation, the burgeoning Reformation, what role does that play in all of these questions? Phenomenal role. But here, just to give you a sense, contemporary document written in 1570 about Italy, that dangerous place. I know diverse noble personages and many worthy gentlemen of England, whom all the siren songs of Italy could never untwine from the matter of God's word. Nor no enchantment of vanity overturn them from the fear of God and love of honesty. But I know as many or more, and sometime my dear friends, for whose sake I hate going into that country the more, who, parting out of England, fervent in the love of Christ's doctrine, and well furnished with the fear of God, returned out of Italy worse transformed than ever was any of Circe's court. So there's just one indication of what Italy was like. So it's quite clear, Shakespeare chooses Italy for about 7 of his plays, and it becomes for him this wonderful dynamic in which one can use that canvas to probe some of these questions in more fertile ways. Canvas, fertile, oh yes. In more fertile, work with me, Emma, help me, I've gone astray. I've lost my reason, and now passion has dominated. See, here's that ancient pull. And of course, Romeo and Juliet, these children, are attacked by that gravitational force of passion. What does one do when passion attacks? The more reasonable in the audience would say, we've come to watch a tragedy. But this work was based on a work that was called Jocund. The most fundamental text, the basis for this text, an old novella, Italian novella, not an English poem that actually was Shakespeare's source. But that novella's title had the word jocund in it. What is jocund about Romeo and Juliet? It's called tragical. What's happy about it? Why would the originator of the tale call it jocund? That's right. Sometimes I can't wait. That's right. That's exactly right. There's a restoration, isn't there? A movement from chaos to order, from chaos to form in this play. As is true in all tragedy. If we had time to discuss the very nature of tragedy, it's not what we think of today. Unfortunately, we've degraded tragedy and we've made it something sad, right? There's an elation, truly, in what Aristotle talks about. It's actually something that there's a sense of elation that occurs when one views true tragedy. So much more to say. I want to take you to some of my favorite passages in the play that kind of get at some of these images. One of the things I want to make clear, though, is relative to the relationship, not just between Romeo and Juliet, the one that's talked about often, but I want to probe a little bit about the relationships between them and their parents, and their surrogate parents. When I say Romeo as a surrogate father, who would that be? Friar Lawrence, right. And who is Juliet's surrogate mother? The nurse, that's right. Because this idea of choice, right? Whom shall I love? One of the most fundamental choices, contemporary society, no question. But in Shakespeare's day, was it more typical in Shakespeare's day to have an arranged marriage or to choose? Was it more typical in Shakespeare's England? I know, I have to circumscribe it a bit more. In Shakespeare's England, to choose, contemporary with Shakespeare's day, to choose or to have it chosen for you. To choose. It's actually one of the fundamental tenets, in some ways, of the Reformation. This idea that the excesses that were inherent in the Catholic Church were linked to arranged marriages. And this asceticism that was espoused by the church, but often did not match it in action. It's clear that the Reformation came to say, marriage will be this place that you will entrust in the heart in consultation with parents. And more than that, there was no question that a child would, of course, consult with parents, Because in Elizabeth's reign and far beyond that reign, it was clear that the family was a microcosm of society, right? You could not have chaos in the family. Let me say it again. You cannot have chaos in the family. Cannot. In the family, you must have order. And there is no question, there's revolution afoot in Verona simply by one questioning the authority of one's parents. Revolution. Cannot have it. Because the extension from the family to the society is tiny. It's right there. It's concomitant. They parallel one another. No question. So where do I take you in the text? I want to take you to so many places. But certainly that first scene between, the first scene where we meet Juliet, right? In that initial scene, thank you, Act 1, Scene 3, here we have Lady Capulet, the nurse, and Juliet. If you just look at the lines Juliet speaks, she says about 10 lines, if that. Representative of the dutiful daughter. I have my daughter read this scene time and I don't. Michael looked at me, he probably does. I don't. My poor daughter. Pray for my children, please, if you have not already begun to do so, just based on our discussion today. But who's the speaker here? It's the nurse, not knowing her place. And some would say another form of chaos. Another form of chaos. Here's a woman that does not know her place. Matter of fact, when the mother tells her to be quiet, she doesn't. And it's Juliet that says, "And stint thou too, I pray thee, nurse, say I." Stop it. Psst. Zip it. A 13-year-old girl telling her surrogate mother to be quiet. It's clear that her relationship with her nurse is far more intimate than that with her mother. I love early on when Lady Capulet dismisses the nurse, right? "Nurse, give me leave a while. We must talk in secret." Then calls her right back. It's clear she's uncomfortable about this conversation. It is a tough conversation, I would guess. I've thought about lots of things to discuss with my daughter. I have never thought about having a conversation about with whom she should marry. In my own mind, many times we've had that conversation. But I know just enough to know that that's a conversation I will never have with my daughter. But anyhow, we'll talk later. But anyhow, it's clear she's not comfortable with her own daughter. It's clear. And one often talks about the relationship between mother and daughter, father and son, and how that has morphed over the years. How many of us were stunned to know how many children were sent off to boarding school, even today in contemporary English society, how that is often true. So the relationship between mother and daughter, that dynamic is a fascinating one, especially in terms of order. Listen to how she talks about marriage. "How stands your disposition to be married?" she asks Juliet. "It is an honor that I dream not of," is her response. I sounded Irish there for some reason. Not of. But it's clear that is the dutiful response, right? It's as though she's been waiting to have this conversation for 13 years or so, probably for 2 years, been waiting to have this conversation. And now she knows precisely what to say. As a matter of fact, she closes her discussion with this line. Because she basically says, speaking briefly, the mother wants to know, "Can you like of Paris's love?" And here's Juliet's response. "I look to like, if looking, liking move. But no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives it strength to make it fly." Gives strength to make it fly. A couplet. Here is this 13-year-old who can answer her mother in a lovely, couplet, but also sustain the order right outside their doors. There is bloodshed. There is disharmony. There is danger. Martial law in England in Shakespeare's day was called often. It was called often to prevent the sort of chaos that's in these streets. Here is a proclamation literally from Elizabeth, just an excerpt from that proclamation. Long preamble. "Therefore her Majesty hath, for better direction of her officers of justice, and for the inquisition and knowledge of all such kind of persons, so either unlawfully gathering themselves in companies or wandering about like vagabonds without any known manner of honest living," sounds like my neighborhood, "notified her pleasure to her council to prescribe certain orders to be published in and about the said city, which she will have straitly observed." This is her imposition, one of several impositions of martial law. the juxtaposition of Elizabeth's own and James's own clear, hard, strong maintenance of order is juxtaposed with the disorder of this play. There's no question. This play can be read in many ways, but there's no question that part of how this can be read is this movement from chaos, led by passion, right? Here is Romeo, this young child who's in love with Rosalind. Benvolio, one of many characters in the play. Benvolio, his name is an aptronym, something about his name that is apt about his character. Benvolio literally means what? Good-willed. That's right, good-willed. And here he is, almost one-dimensional character, often saying, no, no, listen to me, brother, a man of goodwill. He is that voice of reason very often. But how does he reason with Romeo? All you need is a wider array of women to look after, and your feelings about Rosalind will change instantly. And he was right. He was right. It only took a moment for him to decide that there was someone else. And so let's look at that surrogate relationship between the friar and Romeo. I mean, he gives him good advice, one would think. He gives him good advice, and yet I would suggest that the friar in this play, unlike any other Shakespearean friar, I would suggest every other Shakespearean friar is almost wholeheartedly a positive character. I'm not so sure about this one. I'm not. As a matter of fact, I have a rather dark impression of this man. And part of it is linked to his opening speech, Act 2, Scene 3. He is, like most friars of his day, a botanist. Not unusual. He knows herbs well. But when I read and listen to his lines carefully, I question how he has mixed his theology with his botany. About line 15. For naught so vile that on earth doth live, but to the earth some special good doth give. Nor aught so good, but strained from that fair use, revolts from true birth, stumbling on abuse. That line in and of itself, I'd have to ferret out. But I'm not so sure that there isn't an enduring good that does not stumble on itself ever. Goes on to say, virtue itself turns vice. Truly? Being misapplied, virtue can be misapplied. And I know the moment I set up this false standard to say it can never be, but one questions about the heart of this man. Virtue, being misapplied, turns to vice, and vice sometimes by action dignified. Truly? Vice? Dignified? What's that? Machiavellian, isn't it? so this priest, and I could go on, but I would suggest that as he gives Romeo and some good advice, right? He worries that he's stumbled into something, but he's not so perturbed by it. He says, I'll thy assistant be, for this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancor to pure love. He's going to assist Romeo in his idea to marry Campbell's daughter because he sees perhaps a way to move from rancor to love, to move from chaos to order. But he's aligned himself with a young man who is clearly confused, who has clearly allowed his passion to overcome his reason. And his reasonable advice to him seems to be lost on this child. And now, what spins into motion? What spins into motion? These are star-crossed lovers, right? Did we learn that from the very opening? Star-crossed lovers. If we had time, we could talk more about this, but there's a strange intermingling of belief and astrological design and more orthodox faith that Elizabethans had some comfort with that we don't today. Who was John Dee? Is that someone you know? Is that a name you recall from Elizabeth's court? Who was John Dee, D-E-E? He was the Queen's astrologer. He was the Queen's astrologer, is right. And she would often ask him about certain celestial misgivings that she had. But it's quite clear that these young people understand that. Isn't it early on that Romeo has some misgivings, right? He looks at the stars and he says that he is quite certain that there is an ill star. When he said, I defy you stars, late in the play, then I defy you stars, there was probably an audible gasp in Shakespeare's day when he said that. If you defy the stars, we know that you will die. They knew that anyway. It's one of the wonderful things about this play. People talk about the fact its climax is in the prologue. Who sticks around for a play like that? And of course, the answer is everyone. Right? Who left Titanic because you knew the ending? I mean, for gracious sake. So some would say that's what led to a heightened sense of what the play was all about. So many passages that reflect elements of that we've discussed in the past. I do want to take you to what I think is the most amazing and often overlooked line in the play. It's from the balcony scene. It's a scene you know well, maybe not this passage. It's Act 2, Scene 2. And again, the balcony scene, the most oft-quoted scene in all of the play. You've seen and heard so much about it. Yes, you've read that this orchard really is symbolic of so many things, not the least of which is the Garden of Eden, right? It's also the fact that there are high walls there, the protected nature of a virginal young woman, that her father is protecting her there. These walls replicated in London in so many ways, at least the city proper being protected. But beyond all of that, it's an amazing interchange between them. You know, I'll never forget one of my earliest courses on Shakespeare in college. It was led by an eminent Shakespearean scholar. And one of the things that he said was, this is clearly an early work by Shakespeare. More mature love is found in Antony and Cleopatra. These are children. I mean, basically dismissed the play in an instant. And from my perspective, he completely missed the heart and soul of this drama, in that Antony and Cleopatra cannot capture the language, the effervescence, the chaos, the spilling over of the passion of these children. Cannot, could not, and should not. Are they more mature lovers? Well, of course, no question about that. But does their dialogue rise to the level of rhapsody that we have in Romeo and Juliet? Rarely, and never to youthful rhapsody. They're wonderful continuums on a scale that shouldn't be measured in that way, at least from my perspective. But here, to me, is the most fascinating line of all. Act 2, Scene 2. Oh, let's take it up, line 165, kind of building up to that. She says, my Romeo, and he answers, it is my soul that calls upon my name. How silver sweet sound lovers' tongues by night, like softest music to attending ears. Romeo, my Nias, what o'clock tomorrow shall I send to thee by the hour of 9? I will not fail, she says, till 'tis 20 years till then, and then the most magnificent line. She says, I have forgot why I did call thee back. Let me repeat that. She says, I have forgot why I did call thee back. This does not happen in drama. There's a script. Mark and I were just talking. If you forget a line, someone on stage or off stage should quickly give you a line. Prompt, please, line, something. Here, you won't find this in the history of dramatic literature before this point. No one forgets their line. No one. It doesn't happen. It's scripted. You must know what's next. I have forgot why they called thee back. Now, suddenly, that tenuous line that separates reality and illusion is gone. And suddenly, we are there in the bower. We are with these two young lovers. And that we know. That we know. I've forgotten why I called you back. Let me stand here until I'll remember it. I'll stand here until you remember the line. Whatever it was. That's the sort of genius that bursts through Shakespeare's language that you don't find elsewhere. Ben Jonson, a lot of Latin and more Greek, phenomenal playwright, never would have conceived a line like this. I'm sure that he, like many, would have said, well, he led this charge. Would he have blotted more than a word? Shakespeare probably would have X'd out that entire line. But those are the lines that endure in Shakespeare. Those are the lines that set him apart in so many ways. What are the most famous lines? Wow, what are the most famous lines in Shakespeare? What's the passage that was read at John F. Kennedy's funeral? Do you know that passage? It's Act 3, Scene 2. Act 3, Scene 2. And it's during passages like these where you realize this cannot be a 13-year-old girl. You know, one cannot conceive such language at that age. But here in this passage, she recites lines that would be recited at Kennedy's funeral as well. Let's pick it up about line 10 or so. Come, civil knight, thou sober-suited matron all in black, and learn me how to lose a winning match played for a pair of stainless maidenhoods. Hood my unmanned blood, baiting in my cheeks, with thy black mantle till strange love grow bold. Think true love acted simple modesty. Come, night, come, Romeo, come thou day in night, for thou wilt lie upon the wings of night, whiter than new snow upon a raven's back. Come, gentle night, come, loving, black-browed night, give me my Romeo, and when I shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars. This is the passage. And he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun. Oh, I have bought the mansion of love, but not possessed it, and though I am sold, not yet enjoyed. Phenomenal passage, and another passage that relates some of this duality. I would suggest that the relationship between Juliet and her parents, one that I haven't really touched upon, is the relationship she has with her father. I thought one of the most tender moments was when Paris first comes to her father and asks for Juliet's hand. What's the response? Do you recall? She's too young. Give her time. And makes reference to the fact that some are married too young. And in at least one version, he's looking at his wife when he says that. But that's what he says at first. There's a father's response. And yet, once he has pledged her hand to Capulet and she resists, his response to her is frightening, I would suggest. He calls her a cur. He says, die, beg in the street. It's the sort of misogyny that frightens one. Yes, please, Judy.
So Shakespeare, is the question, believed in love at first sight?
Did Shakespeare believe in love at first sight?
I think he did.
Well, he says at least in one other place that there is no love but that which is at first sight. So there is a lingering belief about that, but it is linked to reason as well. If love at first sight is contrary to one's parents' wishes, that's not love at all.
So Romeo and Juliet kiss before they ever know each other's names.
It's true.
Would that have been common in Italy? Not so much in England?
Let me put my hands on that crystal ball and say in just an instant, 13, 14, 15, common. Kissing is common. Kissing whenever, whatever. He kissed by the book, though. Remember that. That was his response. He kissed by the book, so it was pretty tame. Yeah. Juliet was a little disappointed in that first kiss. Probably much more of an English kiss than an Italian kiss. I don't know why the French get credit for a lot of these kissing things, but it's... I like the way Judy helps me cut right to the chase. I've no idea, no idea where I... But his rage at her is a frightening moment. I would suggest that the poet's genius is nowhere more clearly displayed than when they believe Juliet is dead. Let me take you to that passage. I do want to open things up more to the group. But here we are. Act 4, Scene 5. Beginning, say, about line 20. What's amazing in this passage is how the responses to her death match the station, background, available vocabulary, so many other things of the characters that respond to her death. Just a few examples. I mean, look at the nurse's longest speech in response to her death. Again, reflective of her station and lack of training. Here are her words. This is all she can come up with. It's about line 50 or so. Oh, woe! Oh, woeful, woeful, woeful day. Most lamentable day, most woeful day that ever I did behold. Oh, day, oh, day, oh, day, oh, hateful day. Never was there seen so black a day as this. Oh, woeful day, oh, woeful day. She comes up with hateful and woeful and day 3 times. I know there are others that would say there's something operatic about that. Isn't that what Shaw said about the wonder of opera? Well, we'll talk about that later. But compare that to Paris, who I've always found a bit foppish, self-centered. Maybe I'm wrong. Here's Paris, beguiled. Sorry. Is that not foppish enough? I'm sorry. It's not foppish at all, is it? Beguiled, divorced, wronged, spited, slain, most detestable death by thee beguiled, by cruel, cruel thee quite overthrown. Oh, life of love, not life, but love and death. Paris. Sorry, don't mean to be so dismissive, but spiteful? Of whom? You? This is about you, Paris, now at this moment? Of course. Wasn't it always? Wasn't it always? Here's Capulet's response. Despised, distressed, hated, martyred, killed. Uncomfortable time, why camest thou now? To murder our solemnity, O child. O child, my soul, and not my child, dead art thou. Alack, my child is dead, and with my child, my joys are buried. Again, the force of the language of a father who's lost his daughter. Just a stunning passage. Well, so much more to say about the drama, so many other passages to take you to. It is a wondrous work, to be sure. And it's more, of course, than a work of chaos that moves from chaos to order. But one can read these children, of course, as sacrifices. Right? They have been sacrificed to the chaos that Aeschylus cannot control, the chaos that's at the heart of this blood feud, right? What caused this ancient feud between the Capulets and the Montague? What's it about? Why do they hate one another? Why? Glad to hear your silence, because the play never tells us. We don't know. Isn't it that way with some of the most intransigent sorts of feuds, right? The Hatfields, the McCoys, what was at the heart of that American feud? What was it about these two families, and why did it take this? Why this? They erected statues, right? Isn't that how this play ends? They erect statues to Romeo and Juliet, who become sacrificial children on the altar of their hatred, on the altar of their hatred. So many inspired by this work. Spike Lee said that he was inspired by Romeo and Juliet as well when he wrote about the heat of a summer and Do the Right Thing, the heat of a summer and how it can explode into passion and chaos on the streets. How about some questions or passages that you would take me to, or other elements? Norman, please.
I'm sure Shakespeare loves this. It's not going to be your answer. What do we know about his process of creating this kind of amazing dialogue and thought? How did he work? How did he work?
We know very little about process, but this much we know: he was fairly utilitarian in the way that he worked. He worked in a way that made sure his plays were performed, because that's how the company made money, and that's how he made money. So without that pressure, one wonders how much he would have created. So there's no question that there was a real exigency to the process. He would perhaps not have been so prolific had it not been for that important enticement at the conclusion of his dramas. This much we know: almost everything he wrote was borrowed, stolen. The basis for almost all of his works were found somewhere else, very few that sprung from his brain. So he worked from parroting, especially his early works, right? He drew upon people like Plautus and others. There's no question that Plautus would have been taught fairly liberally to him in his grammar school. So it's what he knew best, so his early plays seem to follow that pattern much, much more than his later plays. But you take a play like Hamlet, people say, well, clearly that title relates to his son. Hamnet, that's the relationship. No. There was a play that's called the Hamlet, literally by that title. It's just another Hamlet that was known in Shakespeare's day. So again, but if you put that play up against Shakespeare's works, the difference is so stark and so stunning that it leads us to wonder, agape, astonished by his brilliance. But it's one of the reasons why folks will be talking about him in a place very much like this some days hence. Yes, please, other questions.
I'm not sure that you can draw much about a person's theology from their opus. It doesn't necessarily reflect their opinions. But in Shakespeare's work, can you draw any conclusions about his spiritual condition, his theological thoughts? And Paul Tillich claims that it's existential, and that Hamlet was the ultimate existential document in the world today.
Right. I take issue with Tillich on many levels, although he's a brilliant scholar, and I don't even pretend to be on his level. Excellent question, and hundreds of books have been written along these lines. Some have pointedly said that Shakespeare was an Orthodox Christian man, that he had moved from his father's Catholicism. We're almost sure that his father was a Catholic because he had been fined more than once for not attending church. This was literally a hidden protest that many Catholics embarked upon to protest the changes that had occurred. So we're almost sure that his father was a Catholic. Some say that Shakespeare was as well, and a hidden one. Purgatory is mentioned in this play. It's certainly mentioned in Hamlet. So perhaps some vestigial kinds of references. And you're absolutely right. How can one take his works and attempt to ferret out a theology from it? But it's part of what literary critics do. Macbeth is certainly far more existential. Tomorrow's speech is the most existential speech in all of Shakespeare, probably, maybe in all of literature. It's maybe the most modern passage of all, although I understand why Tillich chooses Hamlet. I think is completely wrong, especially when you consider how Hamlet ends the play. Not existential at all, unless you're Kierkegaardian fully Kierkegaardian in the way you read that. But that being said, there are many works. Take a work like Measure for Measure or Merchant of Venice. I think those are works that are very orthodox at their heart. Shakespeare, for me, is able to balance this idea of mercy and law as well as any writer in the history of the English language that I can think of, maybe in any language. Mercy and law, which again, to me, the heart of Scripture. When Jesus talked about that not a jot or tittle of the law will fall away, and yet understanding what that truly meant, how mercy colors the law, I would suggest it is nowhere better found in literature than in Shakespeare. And perhaps most boldly in Measure for Measure, a great work that literally takes for its title a passage of Scripture, right? It'll be measured unto you, and begins with the man who says, these laws have not been held to strictly enough, so I'll step aside and put someone else in that role as king, and then he'll hold to these strict laws. Sure he will, because that's his disposition and nature. Give him time, and you'll see what will happen. Draw that line in the sand that says, you're a man and you're a god. Every time a man will step over that line. Shakespeare knew that. That much he knew. So much more to say. This play in particular is often cited as one that does not talk much about theology per se. Does not talk about, it does not seem to reflect a theological basis. Of course, isn't that often said of Shakespeare most generally? It's one of the reasons why he's talked about being a transcendent author, one that can appeal to any generation, any time, any people, is because it is not dogmatic and pedantic. It's one of the things that separates his work from so many others. I'm sorry, please.
I'm wondering, along those lines.
She asks that question, so she doesn't trust the friar fully either. And again, to me, his most miserable moment is when he leaves her alone. He literally says, I dare no longer stay, you weak-willed man. She's a child, and forces are coming in that could kill her. You're afraid that you'll be killed, and so you run away and leave her? Oh, well.
So now we have two friars that failed.
Now
that you mentioned the
and are you mentioning the friar from Measure for Measure?
Well, I hadn't thought of that. The one with who failed to deliver the letter.
Oh, there you go. But I would suggest that Friar John, that other friar, probably is not to blame as much because Friar Lawrence just didn't give him good instruction. Here I am. I have no opinions about the play. Yes, please, Judy.
So, Juliet kisses Romeo, knowing that his lips have a poison, but that's not good enough for Shakespeare. He doesn't let that kill her. Instead, he has her, a 13-year-old girl,
Yes, the dagger.
run herself in.
Oh, happy dagger, this is thy sheath.
And I'm just wondering if that's his exclamation point on the point he's making about passion, about all this, the chaos, and she's feeling so, or he's trying to make a point that she feels so strongly about this that she would do something immediately.
Well, again, let's make it clear. Juliet killing herself with a dagger was part of the earliest version of this work. So that early novella identifies Juliet, and she killed herself in that fashion in that work. So he's really parroting, in some ways, that. Some would say it's far more dramatic to have her die in that fashion, although it is a brutal way to die.
It is very operatic, don't you think?
It is very operatic in many ways, of course.
When her
as well.
parents, when they all ran in, seeing the blood,
Yes.
they could say, "Oh, she was just warm," and then that was the. But if she was just laying there with no blood, it wouldn't have been.
Yeah. Of course, you know, Shakespeare's stage was known for blood. It was known for blood, right? No question about that. So, yes, I think it is beautiful and it is dramatic and it follows an earlier pattern. And when I think about Shakespeare making a point, I want to be sure that I don't leave you with the impression that that's what his writing was about. He was writing because he was making a living, but as any great artist, it's clear that making a point was secondary to creating great art, and of course that's what he did. That's why when people want to traduce a play like this to a very pedantic sort of reading of this or other of Shakespeare's play, I try to resist that. It's so much more than any reductionist sort of a view, but it's out there. It's out there for you. How about one or two more questions before we break? Yes, please.
I was wondering if we could talk about Juliet's age and what Shakespeare's, what he's saying about what his, about the nature of love, of romantic love, of human love. And, you know, I was reading, in preparation, I read Marjorie Garber's chapter on Romeo
she's
and
great.
Juliet, in which she talks about it, just to give you an example, you know, she talks about one of the things, how the language, the sonnets with regard to, you know, Romeo and Rosalind are, you know, or something, are a parody of Italian sonnets of love and all the conventional and artificiality. And so I think it's like, you know, Shakespeare, who's a very competitive man, I mean, I think one thing, I don't have any basis, he had to have understood that he's writing the central document about love here.
Mm-hmm.
He had no idea, and this is just, and I mentioned before, that he's just saying that here is what has been done before. This is the best Petrarch could do. Now I will show you how I will show the world how it should be done. But to do this, he puts these lines, the greatest lines ever written about love, or these are given to a 13-year-old girl, who, according to my edition here of this, is young. Actually, he makes her younger than in some of his previous sources.
That's true.
Just to address this top subject of what led him, what made him feel that he needed to do this, to entrust, you know, these lines, these lines, you know, he's writing the pinnacle of everything that's ever been written about this, and he gives these to a 13-year-old girl to recite. I think it must have had very strong reason for this.
He must have, and I wish that I could ferret those out. I really don't know. Much has been written about the fact that not only did he make this her age younger than she is often depicted, it was very young for a young woman to be married in Shakespeare's own day. So in Shakespeare's day, it would have been very unusual. And again, I know Anne was 26 when they married, so I think I earlier said that Shakespeare was 21, or in his 20s he was actually 18 when they married. But so it would be very unusual in Shakespeare's own day for someone to be married this young. And I think one of the points that's inherent in Garber's statement and what Harold's emphasizing here is it tends to undercut some of what she says. Is that part of what they're saying?
I don't think he would have done that. He must have felt that this was necessary for his purpose.
Right.
And no, I don't think it undercuts.
Okay.
No, I think this is what it's. This
Many
was
have said
necessary
that.
for his purpose. And of course, we could say the language is, you know, the play is filled like so, you know, with body language.
It is.
Sexual slang and sexual innuendos.
It is.
Spoken by older people. So that the best I can do is, you know, that he has to completely remove them from this, from the world, you know, already out in the streets, and, you know, they've all, no doubt, everybody will quickly become corrupt, you know, have already fully assimilated this corrupt view of sexuality.
That's a fascinating thought. I mean, the bodiest character in the play, though, is probably Mercutio, who is a fairly young man. So, but there is a tension between youth and age, absolutely, between men and women, all of these age-old tensions. But that's a beautiful thought. I don't think there's any question that there is a purity that is linked to her youth and virginity, right?
Yeah, that's what I think.
So there's no question about that. Yeah, that's an excellent point. We have time for one more question.
in the frequent use, Shakespeare would take passages and use them in one play and use them again, and sometimes it's hard to remember where they came from because they appeared in several works. In his frequent drawing from older texts, in his day at Oxford down the street or where, would they have had a prohibition against plagiarism? They certainly wouldn't have ways of checking it on the internet, find it so quickly. But how was that looked upon? Do you have a feel for that?
Yes, actually, that's something that's been written about at length. In truth, plagiarism is a much more modern term and concept. And in Shakespeare's day, it was very typical to take something that was known well and to turn it in a new way. That was part of wit, right? It was a pleasure of being a gentleman to get together and have these witty sort of parries that one would have, and that was very typical of Shakespeare as well. So the fact that the works were well known actually enhanced his reputation. It enhanced his reputation because they said, look what he's done with this, and he's made it this. That's the very nature of true learning and true wisdom and true wit. And that's one of the things that Shakespeare prided himself upon, was his ability to do that. His vocabulary is often written about. Many people say that to the word they know precisely how many words are in his vocabulary. Most experts believe it was in the range of 30,000 words, 30,000 words. The average, college student today's vocabulary is what? Anyone want to guess? 7? I know. Yeah, with some it's cool, right? How you doing? I'm cool. All right. How was the class? Cool. Amazing is another one. Amazing. About 1,000, right? About 1,000 is the number that I often hear. So rather stunning to think. And again, he did create many words. Certainly the word dawn is one that comes to mind. Dawn was never used to describe the start of a day before Shakespeare. So it's one of the many words that he coined that endures to this day. Thank you for pulling me out of such, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Harold. Let's do it again soon. Oh.
Brief, very small, the traditional book club gift.
Thank you. I've already received my gift, so, but thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Harold. Really appreciate it. Thank you all.